Hello, welcome to this advanced tutorial on drawing the portrait. In this set of classes, we're going to be learning the advanced techniques that you need to use in order to render highly realistic portraits. The class is going to be broken down into 10 sessions, each session focusing on one particular feature until at the end we have a finished portrait. So let's begin with the nuts and bolts of the course. Supplies. We have our eraser, the electric eraser, the click eraser stick that has an eraser tip that you can click up just like a mechanical pencil, and of course the kneaded eraser, which looks like a gray blob. It comes wrapped up in a square and then you knead it. For drawing implements, we're going to be working with graphite sticks like this. Graphite sticks come in different hardnesses. These are just, they look like little pastel sticks, but they're solid graphite. We're also going to be working with graphite pencils. This is my selection. I have many different brands in here. I'm ranging from a 9H, which is very hard, all the way up to a double E, which is incredibly soft. In between is a 6H, 4H, 2H, H, 4B, 6B, and 8B. You don't need to have all of those pencils. I'm just showing this to show you a sense of the kind of range that I'll be using in my graphite pencils. We'll also be using carbon pencils. I'm only using a set of 4 different carbon pencils. Here I have a B, a 2B, a 6B, and a 4B. And we'll also be using charcoal. This is willow charcoal. It's just, you can even see the indentations of the original willow stick in it, but it's just willow sticks that have been burned. They have a very soft, easy to blend property. So I also like to use charcoal pencils that I can keep my hands a little bit cleaner with. They're just like graphite pencils, except the core is charcoal. Blending tools are just as important as your pencils. You'll be familiar with stomps and tortillons from taking another drawing class. They're exactly the same except that one is rolled paper and one is kind of pressed paper, so one has a softer point. You should also get yourself a chamois cloth. Before you use it in a drawing, make sure that you test it on a piece of paper to see that it doesn't leave any yellow residue. And some white felt. Just felt from a craft store, cut into different squares. We'll also be blending with paper, scratch paper, tracing paper, and other things that you want to experiment with. For paper, there's a very wide variety of papers. We're going to be focusing on portraits, and because of that, you want to go for as low texture as possible. Rag-based papers are going to be acid-free, so they're not going to yellow over time. Wood pulp papers will yellow over time, but they're much less expensive. You decide what to use based on your expertise level. This is just a fairly inexpensive drawing pad. It's just recycled. This would be for sketching, doing things that I don't want to keep long term. For higher quality drawings, try hot pressed watercolor paper. It has a very smooth finish. It's thick and it's going to hold a lot of medium. Or other high quality drawing papers that are heavyweight with low tooth. Illustration board is another surface that you might like to experiment with. Let's go over a few key points to how to see your drawing. This shaded ball that I drew will help point out the 5 different kinds of light that you should look for. We're focusing in this course on creating ultra-realistic portraits, and so it's not as simple as just highlight, midtone, and your shadows. There are actually 5 different levels of light. You have, of course, the highlight. That's the brightest part. That's where the light is actually reflected back into your eye. It's going to be fairly small. The rest of the form that's facing the light and is not the highlight is called the halftone. Then you have the area between the halftone and what's called reflected light that gets a little bit lighter, and that's the darkest part of the shadow. That's called the core of shadow. After the core of the shadow, you come to reflected light, where some of the light is bouncing back into the shadow from other objects. So it's going to be lighter than the core of shadow, but still darker than the halftone. It's really important to remember not to make your reflected light too dark. And then of course you have your cast shadow. Generally the cast shadow is darkest the closest to the object that is casting it. So right down here. There are two different shading methods that we'll be using in this course. The first is using strokes. So if my light was coming from this direction, I know that this side of the can is going to be in highlight. So I'm going to start shading on the shadow side of the can. I'm going to start with a 6B pencil in the shadow, lay it on its side, and stroke back and forth. Notice that I'm following the curve of the can. I'm trying to keep my strokes as even as possible. Then, when I get to the bottom, I'll start with a 4B pencil. And so in this way, we develop our darks gradually and in a very smooth and natural way. See, my strokes are getting longer. And you just use even pressure as you go all the way across. Then go a little bit harder. That was a 4B, now I'll go up to a 2B. This is another reason why it's a good idea to have a wide range of pencils. Until I get to H, 2H, ending with maybe a 6H, and I can just develop it up just like this. It takes a long time, but this is the only way that you can get a very gradual light to dark tone that looks natural. So if you want ultra realism, you're going to have a lot of patience. That's my warning before the course even begins. The second way to blend is if you're laying down a tone. I'm going to use, once again, a soft pencil. I'm working top to bottom, and I'm going to work left to right. And I'm using small motions. They're little circular motions with my pencil. When I get to the bottom, I go back up to the top, and I overlap a little bit, but I try to keep that tone as smooth and even as possible. I would cover this entire area that way, and then put the paper on its side and work crosswise. This is a cross-hatching technique. Notice how the tone appears darker when I'm going over areas that already have tone in them. When I cover the surface again, I put my paper on at the other angle, and I cover a third time. This, of course, is going to vary according to how dark you want your shadows to be. Again, expect it to take a long time, but this is the general pattern direction. Up, down, straight, cross one way, cross the other way. Now when we have extremely large areas to cover, we can use a piece of willow charcoal and lay it in much more quickly. And again, go over the top both ways. Another key component of drawing realistic, careful drawings is Frisket film. This is what we're going to use to mask areas that we want to keep white while we work on the backgrounds. Blending is another key factor in producing quality work. So let's take a look at the different effects we can get with different blending mediums. Felt produces an even tone that picks up some of the grain of the paper. You can see there's a much more textured line involved with using paper as a blending tool. Then we have a stomp. Less smooth than the felt. and we have the chamois cloth, which produces the smoothest line of all. Because there's such a huge variance with the blending mediums combined with the charcoal or carbon or graphite and the tooth of the paper, what you should do is take a scrap of the paper that you're going to be rendering on and do a strip like this in graphite, one in carbon and one in charcoal. Run through it with some different texturing tools so that you know what is going to appear on the paper before you actually try it out. Finally, in blending tools, having a brush, a paintbrush, small and large, is another good tool to have available if you need it. That produces very soft, very subtle variations that you can probably not even pick up on camera, but you'll be able to see it as a viewer. Finally, we have some last tools to look over. The first is a compass for making perfect circles, but more importantly for helping with layout. A straight edge or a triangle, again to help with layout and for making straight lines. And a razor blade, which will be important. You could use it for sharpening pencils to save on wood, or to pick out highlights in small areas. Finally, it's a good idea to have some sandpaper. This is for sharpening. What I like to do is attach it to the drawing board over a scrap piece of paper that's been folded to keep it lifted up, and then as I drag my pencil down to sharpen it, like this, the excess graphite or charcoal can be shaken onto the paper and then saved in a little cup, something like this. Then if I need to paint with some charcoal or graphite dust, I have it on hand, and I can use a paintbrush and apply it directly to the board. That covers the bare bones, the tools, and the basic strokes we'll be using. So now it's time to get into the actual drawing.